Great. So, thank you for joining us. My name is Marc Mercuri. I lead product management for So the funny thing is, short story, I don't go to our monthly business reviews with our senior vice presidents all the time, but whenever we do, and sometimes like just now, we're just going to turn it off. My wife will call right in the middle, and you have everyone in the boardroom sort of turn around and like, what is this guy doing? So I apologize for that. But my name is Marc Mercuri. I lead product management for Azure Blockchain Engineering. My gosh. So someone from New Jersey, please call me back later. The third time, I lead product management for Azure Blockchain Engineering. I've had the good opportunity to work with the team both before I joined and in the team for the last couple of years. One thing I can say about the team is we've got sort of the blockchain religion, and we've been spending a lot of time with customers. Seriously. We're just going to take that and put that down. Thanks. I think someone wants to sell me a timeshare really badly. So at any rate, we've been spending a lot of time with customers. You may have heard some of the recent announcements we had at our Build conference last week with folks like JP Chase, with folks like Starbucks, with folks like Xiaomi. There's a number of folks that we've been spending a lot of time just trying to figure out the hard problems of how to do real things. And so today we want to talk a little bit about the journey, what we've learned since we were here last year, and some of the things we've built that we've been finding that these customers I just talked about have been using to be super productive and do some really interesting things. So we've been on a journey since 2015. For folks who've been here for a while, you may know a guy named Marley Gray. He's a guy all kicked off for us. We've been going for quite some time. We started off with customers saying, hey, can you help me deploy blockchain infrastructure? It was difficult to do, especially in the early days. And then we helped them do that, and they said, great, what do I do with it? And so the first thing they wanted to figure out to do is like, what scenarios make sense? Because the first thing I'll tell you, and it's going to sound weird as the guy who's responsible for sort of driving the blockchain business at Microsoft, is that not every scenario, as you guys know, is appropriate for a blockchain. Where it is, it can be totally transformational for both the business industry and in some cases the world, but really just figuring out like what makes a lot of sense. And the next thing is once they had figured that out, and this is what we talked with you guys about last year, was, hey, we have an idea, we have the infrastructure, we want to go build a POC, and pretty consistently, no matter who you talk to, it was about $400,000 to $500,000 to build a POC in about 8 to 12 weeks. And sometimes those POCs were not very good. Like I remember one where this exec basically said it was like a C prompt, and then it just scrolled, like all these, and kind of like the demo I'm going to show you at the end of today's session, ironically. But they're like, hey, I'm not sure if that was my business process or the beginning of the matrix, but like, I don't know, and I'm not going to invest. And so we found a way, because we had just talked to so many customers, that if you wrote a smart contract and you described the business process a little bit, we could create an end-to-end application for you. And so that was last year. And so between then and now, we've had over 2,000 customers build thousands of applications on this. And we learned a lot about the scenarios they wanted to go build, the tools they needed, how they wanted to integrate. We saw multi-billion-dollar financial institutions that said, hey, we're going to do this stuff on the blockchain, but by the way, we still do stuff with FTP, and I need to get a file from my FTP site in there. Or we had another customer who said, hey, we're working on the broader plan, but right now I'm getting a PDF as an email attachment. How do I get that stuff in? Or I want to integrate with Office and these other things. And we'll talk more about that as we go through. But if we were to sort of categorize the three things, like three buckets of how we look at the world now, there's launching and managing the network. There's modeling smart contracts. And then the clear thing to us and to our customers is that the smart contracts and the ledger are super important. But you're building an end-to-end application, and that has a user experience, it has database, it integrates with existing systems. We talked about something with a large coffee company just last week, and so if you're going to do a provenance scenario that's going to go from farm to cup, at the farm, people aren't walking around with iPhones or Android phones. They're doing SMS to a phone in a box on a stick that then SMSs that up to someplace that's going to do data collection on. And on the other end of the spectrum, people want to be able to interact with bots and other things like that and ask what the current status of things are. So building and extending the application out is super important. And we've sort of been investing in a number of those areas. But let's go ahead and start with launching and managing the network. So last year, when we launched Workbench, we were effectively deploying a template, and we were deploying the infrastructure, but you had to manage that. And so customers were pretty clear that, hey, this is helpful, but it's a lot of time for me to build the network, manage the health, picking the right ledger, connecting nodes, establishing the node roles, managing permissions. And this was sort of table stakes. And this is what got things started. And they came back and they talked about some things that aren't on this slide. They said, we need confidentiality, right? And so taking a technology that's designed for the public chain and bringing it into a consortium environment does not necessarily mean that everybody needs to see everything. We want to have a level of confidentiality that's there. The other thing is that when we work in a consortium, and when I say consortium, there could be like 30 insurance companies working together, or hundreds of people in a supply chain working together. And they said, well, the conditions are very different than a public chain, right? So arguably we know where these people, there's natural disincentive. So I know where they're incorporated, I know where we do business. We typically have business contracts that govern the interactions regardless. And so the risk is very different. And so can we look at different types of consensus algorithms, and can we find ways to make things go faster? And so there were a couple of things there that they wanted that weren't necessarily there. If you're looking at, say, Ethereum, for example, they weren't necessarily in stock Ethereum. And so one of the names we heard pretty consistently with that community was Quorum. And so what I'd like to do is call up Sam. Sam is the gentleman that's leading Quorum. And I'd love to have you talk about Quorum a little bit, and then we'll sort of come back and talk about what we're doing together.
Thanks, Mark. So my name is Sam Rafala. I head the Quorum engineering team. We started working on Quorum probably 2015, started exploring and experimenting with Ethereum, and looking at all of the other protocols that were out there. But we wanted to work with a protocol that was open and driven by the community and an entire ecosystem. And from there, we built Quorum. We started looking at the Geth client, which is the Go Ethereum implementation of the Ethereum protocol. It was running probably 80% of the network, so it was a production client. It was running for a lot of use cases in production, public Ethereum. But as we started running it, we saw that we needed specific features in it that did not exist in the client. And building from scratch is normally not a good idea. You don't want to start from scratch if something that exists works well for you. So we took the Go Ethereum protocol, the Go Ethereum client, the Geth client, and introduced a few features to it. Those are the features that were requested by most of the clients and most of the use cases we were testing with, correct? So you needed privacy, finality, performance, and permissioning. These are the core features that any use case that you want to run in a production environment, in an enterprise, in a consortium will require from you. Now, with those features, we've been heavily improving on them. So today we released a new version for our permissioning model. It's based on a smart contract. It's an RBAC-based permissioning smart contract model. And that allows you to configure smart contracts, configure nodes in a smart contract, configure accounts, roles associated with those accounts, and they all belong to an organization. So on day one, our permissioning model was based on configuration files, and all of the consortium members needed to configure those separately and needed to agree on them. So now it's all driven based on smart contracts. And this week, we're going to release another privacy implementation on top of the Zephyr protocol, or Zephyr white paper. If you read the paper, it's by a team from Stanford that originally wrote the bulletproof implementation. So it's driven by, or it's based on bulletproof and Sigma protocol. We're going to release that this week, and it allows you to improve the initial work that we've done on privacy through our zero knowledge layer. So expect that, and of course, if you see a new logo here, this is our new logo for Quorum. If you have any questions around the work we're doing, please stop by the booth. Now, just a quick note from what you see Quorum here, just an architecture view of how the apps connect to Quorum. You'll see that Quorum itself is not significantly more than a fork of the Go Ethereum client. So it's mostly the existing Ethereum clients with the features we just spoke about earlier. And for privacy, besides the zero knowledge layer and besides what we're doing For Zether, we introduced an off-chain component we refer to as a transaction manager. We have an enterprise version for that that works with a lot of the features and services that are available in Azure for key management and for database connectivity and for redundancy. So we're using a lot of the Azure services there, or there's adapters available to connect the Tessera node or the transaction manager with Azure. So, Mark?
Thanks, Sam.
Sure.
So, Sam talked about Azure. Last week, we released Azure Blockchain Service. Azure Blockchain Service delivers Quorum as a managed service for the enterprise inside of Azure. And so, historically, Microsoft might have come out with Microsoft Blockchain Server Enterprise Edition 2019 R2 or something silly like that. But we, like Sam and Tim will be here in just a minute, we know that we're talking, and clearly the folks in this room, because you're at this conference, know that we're looking at a new category of applications, multi-party applications sharing compute and data. And we think it's going to be fairly transformative, or very transformative. And the way we're going to get there faster is working with the open source community, working with great folks like Sam and the Quorum team, with Truffle and others that we're working with more broadly. And so we've done this at the ledger level. And let me show you what that looks like. So I was joking as we went through the dry run earlier, this looks boring. That's the point. Right? It looks like every other service that you get from Azure. And so from an enterprise adoption standpoint, sort of bringing this to mainstream enterprise, it has some things that everyone looks for and expects. So one is being able to deploy this, that's table stakes. I can apply tags to this. So from a billing perspective, I can look at how much these nodes are costing me. I can look at a role-based access control and have auditing of what's there. You can see that we've got monitoring and telemetry here. So you can go ahead and set up a flexible network very, very quickly. You can quickly provision new network members. And you can offload network operations. You can take the ops out of DevOps, and you'll get full node management, health, and performance monitoring, the things that you're typically going to expect from a platform as a service offering. And again, if this looks like things you've seen before, that's the point, because it's going to be easy for people to go ahead and onboard this, because enterprise IT organizations, they don't have time to learn a lot of new things. Now, we talked about this being consortiums. We talked about sometimes consortiums as many as 30 people. Well, we also have consortium management within here as well. So you can establish network governance, you can create policies, define privacy settings, member permissions, and manage voting through a simple interface. You can manage the network status and health, as you can see here, and you can build on a robust network. Azure's underlying network is one of the best in the business. So I could talk about it, but I'd rather show it to you. You can sort of see it in person. And so I'm going to go ahead now and shift over to one of many demos. This is a demo-heavy session. So one thing I'll point out here is I'm using the new version of Microsoft Edge, our web browser, built on Chromium, which now supports MetaMask, which you can't see. So why don't I fix that? I made that big dramatic statement. You couldn't see it. You can see MetaMask is up there in the corner. But that wasn't supported before. In Edge, it now is, so kudos to the folks that are there. This is the Azure portal, folks who haven't seen it. If you go to portal.azure.com, there's provision new resources. And I'm just going to type in here, Azure Blockchain Service. You can see that's right over here in the marketplace. Okay, so I'm gonna pick a subscription. So folks that are less familiar, a subscription in Azure is basically your billing mechanism. And I'm gonna go ahead and pick here, we're gonna go into a resource group. A resource group is just effectively a grouping of different things you deploy. You can apply locks and other things to that. In terms of the consortiums, I'm gonna go ahead and go to East US. And And I'm going to go ahead and create a new consortium. We'll call this Consensus Live. And here we're going to use quorum. The member details, we'll call this Consensus Live Member 1. Go. We passed our validation rules. Put another password here. I'm going to assign the tags if I want to. In the back of the room, can we dim the lights? Is that possible?
Can we zoom in as well, like the button?
We can do that. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and created that. So in the back of the room, is it possible to turn the lights down a little bit? Is that helpful at all, or are these lights right here still problematic for you? Okay. All right, so that's going to take a few minutes. So like a good cooking show, we'll take something out of the oven we've already baked. You can see here we've got an overview. Right now we're not pushing anything through that, but I can see all my transactions. I can go ahead and look at my transaction nodes. I can click here. And then over here, we're going to see this very quickly, but you can see that we have access keys and other things like that. I'm not going to show that because it's a live demo, but it makes it very easy. We also do code generation for you as part of that. But very easy to go ahead and get deployed. You saw what it took to get the thing set up. Consortium management today is done through scripting. We have a great UI that's going to fast follow there. But that's how easy to get things started. So remember before, when you have infrastructure is great, but what do you go do with it? And so we've done a fair amount of work to help people understand what scenarios are there. But then when you want to go and build and innovate on top of that ledger, what are the things that people want to go do? They want to connect with existing systems. Could be Office, could be SAP or Dynamics, something you've built in-house. They want to be able to go ahead and interact with them. They want to be easily scaled to production. So we have Azure Blockchain Workbench, and that's still something that we have available. We'll work with Azure Blockchain Service. But they also want to be able to scale to production when they're ready to go do that. We'll talk about some ways that people can leverage that. And then the other thing, and this is super important, right, is build with the OSS tools that you love. So we just talked about MetaMask. We've got Solidity language support that we'll talk about in a minute, but also with Truffle. So Truffle has had, was it 2.7 million downloads across the suite? So 2.7 million folks can't be wrong. And so we're really happy to talk about the work we're doing with Truffle as we go to this next section, which is really about how do you deliver a world-class developer experience. So how many people here have developed with Solidity before? How many people have developed for Solidity for more than a year and a half? How many people like the experience? Yeah, no hands. So neither do we. And there was actually a funny story. We were at DevCon last year. And DevCon, for folks that are less familiar, that's the Ethereum conference. And someone said to me, it's like, hey, someone fairly senior in Ethereum would love to have Visual Studio Code be a great development environment for Solidity and for Ethereum in general. And they said, if you did, this person would get on stage at your next conference and wear an Azure t-shirt. So last week, we actually had Vitalik Buterin on stage with us to announce this. We're going to go ahead and show you what this is in just a second. But let's talk about what the characteristics were that we heard from customers that they needed to have, and what was missing for it to be part of like the mainstream enterprise staple. So one is, if we're going to offer a service, we need to have the ability to do integration with that service. So how do we connect with it? How do we create services? And do that all from within Visual Studio Code? Because the solution for this really had to be not just for Windows or Mac, but for Windows, Mac, or Linux. So regardless of which platform you're on, they wanted to be able to do that integration. Then there was basic stuff like file new project. Like most enterprise developers just sort of take that for granted. Solidity developers, one of the reasons your hands were down, because that wasn't really there. Language syntax checking. There's a guy named Juan Blanco who had a great plugin that also did things like linting. We brought that into the tooling we're working on as well. So we're big fans of Juan and have worked with him for a number of years as an Ethereum. And so we did that. We needed compilation. And then, Tim, if you want to come up, we'll talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that we started doing with Truffle. And so when we look at just doing deployment, we knew that there were certain scenarios that were super important for the public chain, certain scenarios that were important for the private chain, and some of those would start on private and then eventually go to public later on when regulations and things matured. But there was also this need to be able to deploy locally. So a dev on his laptop wanted to be able to get something running and be able to test. And so Tim and his team, you've got something for that we've sort of baked in here as well?
Yeah, is this on? Can you hear me?
It's not, but go ahead, Tim. Take that guy.
Yeah, so I was too busy focusing on whether my mic was working.
So yeah, so just you've got Ganache. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And
Thank you. Yeah, so we've been working for 4 years now trying to build developer tools for Ethereum, and Ganache specifically is one of those tools that makes development easier. So the experience that I had, especially when I came on board, was and this again was 4 years ago, is I'm running the private chains on my laptop. I have a laptop that's like overheating, trying to like run the blocks and do all the encryption and cryptography related to creating that, and it was slow, and we figured that there had to be a better way. So what we did is we created what we're calling Ganache, which is our second product. I call it a sister application to Truffle. And it looks, acts, and feels like an Ethereum blockchain, but it's not an Ethereum blockchain. So it gets rid of the consensus algorithm. It gives you Ether as part of this local sandbox for you to develop instantly. So you don't need to go figure out how to fund an account and do all this stuff and work on a private chain. You can just you can start developing quickly.
And so the other thing that customers came back and told us fairly consistently is, okay, so we're going to develop locally. And so when we develop like traditional applications for databases, what we want to do is we have a local copy of the database. So we'll just go ahead, that should be pretty easy for us to do. And so what they would do is they'd have a script, they would sort of spin up the schema for the database, they'd have another script to load the database, and they're like, yeah, so how do I do that for blockchain? It's like, well, actually you've got smart contracts and you have these transactions that are coordinated and signed amongst parties. It was actually not a trivial thing for them to go do, and they're like, that didn't make sense to them. And so as we're looking at this, the nice thing about working with Tim and the team is like, oh yeah, we kind of have a solution for that. So you want to talk about how you can do forking of the chain and how that works here?
Yeah, one of the most exciting features of Ganache that almost nobody knows about, we call it chain forking. So imagine in the Web 2.0 world, you have a database, the production database you want to work on. Your application is running on this production database, and you have all this data on it that, really, if you were running that application and testing that application live, like you would want all that data in order to make sure that your application works against it. Well, if you do that on the blockchain, you're going to have to like spend real Ether. Also, you're going to edit the production database. You don't want to do that while you're testing. What we can do with forking is literally fork any blockchain that you want into your sandbox. So you're building on Ganache, you're building your application on your local development environment, but whenever you need an account or code or data that exists on the public chain or whatever chain you decide to use, then it'll be right there for you as if you were developing on that chain to begin with. So you get all the development you need at zero cost.
And so, great, now they had a local copy. Now they wanted to run tests. And so we were able to lean in with, Tim and team had done Truffle tests. And so we have Truffle tests that are there today. We like to say at Azure, we ship software every day. So we're actually, we haven't released it yet, but we have features that are coming soon for actually doing some automatic test generation for your contracts. And the next thing is, hey, how do we do DevOps? And DevOps not just for my organization. Now I'm in a consortium. How do we do consortium DevOps? And so there are a couple pieces to that. And so you think about, historically, I might do my work on my local machine, I check it in, I go through a build pipeline, maybe a release pipeline for my organization. But now I need to be able to do this for my check-ins, but then there's a consortium, and then maybe applications in the consortium may take dependencies on that. So how do you go ahead and do that? Well, the cool thing is that some of the things that Tim has already talked about, so Ganache and Truffle tests that I just mentioned, will actually run inside of Azure DevOps. And so as part of my release pipeline, I can deploy to Ganache, test that this is working for me. and be able to run that through. And then within DevOps, we'll talk about a little bit later, we thought, at first we talked to the Azure DevOps people and said, hey, do we need to build a new product here? And they said, no, actually, we described the use cases and said, because that's already there. You just need to configure it a little bit differently. And so there's some things we'll talk about there on that front. Logic App and Flow integration and Power Apps integration. We'll talk a lot more about this as we go through this session. We'll talk about some demos here. But the things that we saw most often from folks were, hey, integration was a big challenge. Building apps was something that they would like to be able to do faster. And so these will help us do that. We'll talk about that as we go through. And then there's a bunch of things here that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But having worked with 2,000 customers, we learned the things they want to do most often. And what do they want to do? They want to take their smart contracts. They didn't just want to get them on the ledger. They want to expose the functions and access to the state as microservices. They want to be able to go ahead and publish data coming up for events into databases. They want to be able to publish them to reporting systems like Power BI on the Microsoft stack, or to service systems such as Service Bus or Event Grid that their people already knew how to understand and interact with. So we now have this available. This is the Azure Blockchain Development Kit for Ethereum. This is free, runs inside of Visual Studio Code, also free, Mac, Windows, Linux. It runs everywhere. You can download it now. And what it's going to allow you to do is you're going to build, test, and this is an example of Azure DevOps. You'll be able to deploy, and you're going to be able to integrate. We're going to talk through a number of samples in real-world apps right now. So let's go ahead and do a demo. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up a new instance here. Okay, so this is Visual Studio Code for folks who are less familiar. This is my command palette. So there's a welcome page here. We'll just show that. So hey, how do I get started? We need to wait a minute while this is going ahead and activating the extensions. So what I'm going to do is go to my existing Control-Shift-P. And we'll go to the welcome page here. And so we get a welcome page. And so anytime you're using this, you can say, hey, I want to go ahead and create an Azure blockchain service. I want to connect to a consortium. We have this thing called Block Talk. So Block Talk, we do these 5 to 8 minute videos that show you how to do a number of different things to help you get started. One of the things that I joke about with folks in the team is that we really have to optimize for the hour. So there's no shortage of interest in blockchain, but people, it's not their full-time jobs in a lot of cases. They have an hour before work. They might have an hour at lunch if they're lucky, and an hour while their spouse watches Game of Thrones, Grey's Anatomy, or something like that. And so we want to make sure we give you something that within an hour you could be super productive and feel like you could do something. For folks who've been doing this for a while, you would basically get 3 clumps of hair pulled out in that first hour. And now we want to be able to have you go build something that's pretty interesting. So we're going to go over here, and I'm going to hit Control-Shift-P. And I'm going to see, it says new Solidity project. So Solidity, if folks are less familiar, is there. And we're going to go just create a basic project. And I'm going to come back here and pick my directory. I'm going to select new project path. And we're going to see a bunch of things here happening with Truffle. Just give it a second. So it's going ahead, it's pulling down what's called a truffle box. Tim, do you want to talk about what a truffle box is?
Yeah, sure. So especially early on, we realized that you can build your smart contracts fairly easily with our workflow. However, integrating those smart contracts into your application was extremely different and varied no matter, depending on the project you were creating. So originally, we had built one way of doing things and one way of building a front end, but we realized we had to completely change that. So truffle boxes are a way to get started really easily that show you how to integrate a blockchain application with various different front ends, various different applications, and even Azure.
Great. So we've come back here. As you can see, we've got a little project that's been developed. I can see that there are tests that were created for my Hello Blockchain, which is the one I started with. You can see I've got a contract in here for Hello Blockchain. So hey, you know what? I want to go ahead and build the contracts. Okay, it's going to go ahead and kick that off.
Before this, you'd have to use the command line, by the way.
Yes. And we're going ahead and building that out. And now it's finished. And so we have a lot of people that could figure out how to do the compilation. Like, how do I get this thing deployed? What do I need to do? Well, wouldn't it be nice if you could just right-click and just make that happen? We've done that. So click Deploy Contracts. So you can see here that I can create a new network. I can go to development, which is a version of Ganache that we talked about earlier, or to build. So let's just deploy to Ganache. Does everything for me. I don't need to worry about it. For folks who've done Solidity, you know that this is sort of simplifying stuff you do every day. We get the output. We've got our contract details. And that's great. That's now in there, and I can test locally. But hey, you know what? I'd really like to go ahead to Azure. I can just select this here. I'm going to use a Mnemonic I've got on my machine. And now we're going to go ahead and deploy to that environment as well. So we've deployed locally, and we've also deployed to Azure pretty easily.
Do you want to scroll down a little bit? That is, it's actually deploying to a live chain right now, which is pretty exciting. But you can deploy to the public chain, right, Mark?
Yes. And so the general rule we have on the team is that we love all developers, and we realize that public chain, I'm just grabbing the contract here, folks. And we know that people want to deploy to all three chains. And so you can deploy to both public chains as well as public testnets. And so you can go ahead and configure that to work in here as well. And so if we look at what we've got so far, it's, hey, how do I get a project set up? How do I go ahead and do testing? How do I do compilation? How do I get access to a lot of information? Also, there's things like, hey, what are the access keys and things like that? And so I'm authenticated here. I can just copy like my RPC endpoint. So things that, there's lots of little things in here that take up time that are just sort of annoyances that we spend a lot of time listening, and we sort of baked into the tool. And so we've got all that, and that was well and good. And we said, this is great. We've worked with our friends with Truffle. We brought a lot of goodness that they brought in. And we said, there's some other things we think we could bring in too. And so remember when we said, hey, people like to be able to create microservices for their functions, or they want to be able to connect to data. Well, we said, wouldn't it be great if, in addition to being able to right-click and deploy, that I could go ahead and generate data publishing workflows, or event publishing workflows, or microservices, or reporting. And so for data, you'll say, okay, I want to go ahead and generate data, and it will find every event in your smart contract. It will then generate the schema for the database for that event, and the code that will automatically populate that for you. And you can go ahead and deploy that. For reporting, something similar, we'll stream data into a reporting data set for Power BI. For eventing, similar things, it'll publish those things out. And then for microservices, which I'm going to show you now, it'll go ahead and create a set of microservices for your smart contract. Now, we have three options here: Logic Apps, Flow Apps, or Azure Functions. Logic Apps and Flow are sort of like if this, then that for integration. And Azure Functions is a microservice offering that we have on our platform. I'm going to select Logic Apps. I'm going to give it my contract address. Did we lose that there? One second here. So Logic Apps, contract address. Then it's going to ask me which subscription I want to deploy to, which resource group I want to deploy to. And see down here, it's just gone ahead and created all those for me. So if I come over here to build, and I look at Hello Blockchain, you see there's services, and underneath that we have created, at the end of the day, these logic apps, which we'll look at in one of them example in a moment, are JSON under the covers. So we've created JSON for the logic app connector to create microservices for every single one of your functions, as well as access the state. And we've already pre-configured it with the contract address and the ABI and the bytecode and that sort of thing. So you don't need to do anything. So you'll be able to take this and be able to run right away and be super productive with that. So as I said, we ship software every day. And so one of the things that folks said to us is, hey, what we really like to be able to do is do interactive debugging. That's what we get in enterprise experience. Can you guys do that too? Well, as it turns out, our friends at Truffle were already working on that. Some of the folks on my team started working with them on that. And you're starting to see here, this is sort of the first preview of sort of this functionality that we'll be shipping soon. And so you're going to be able to go ahead and walk through and do interactive debugging. So folks who have been doing this for a while, they know that like the Solidity experience has not been super, and this is actually bringing it to more of the types of things that you would traditionally see. And so, I'd really like to thank Tim and the Truffle team. If you think about the great experience we've got at the Ledger with Sam, complemented with what we've got from Tim and the Truffle team, bringing sort of the best of open source and Microsoft together, I think we've delivered sort of milestone 1, and there's a lot more stuff that we're looking to do in this space. So Tim, thank you for joining me up here for that.
You're welcome. Stay here.
Yeah, because we're going to talk about this. So, I just showed you how you could right-click and generate data or services and that sort of thing. Well, there's another thing that we learned here. So if I'm a full-stack developer, that's going to make me super productive. But in an enterprise, there are lots of people who are specialized. There are database developers, there are services developers, there's people that are doing reporting. They want nothing to do with Solidity. They don't want to learn about smart contracts. They want to do their job. But they don't know how to do that in a blockchain world. And so what you can do is you can ship them the smart contract and do what I just did. And so if I'm someone who works on reports or someone who works in the data world, I can go ahead and ship you and I'm a smart contractor, I can ship you my smart contract. You can use that tool, you can right click on it, it will get it into the world that you know and love, and you can be productive in minutes. Now, those things that we generate, we also know that people sometimes don't go through Visual Studio Code. Sometimes they'll go through Azure, and for these tools, for Flow and for Logic Apps, there are these visual designers. And so within the visual designers, there's also this notion of templates that will stitch together the things that we use in our code generation. And so I'm happy to announce that available now, we have templates, as you can see here, for a number of those interactions, so you can do them directly from the gallery as well as from inside the tools. Now, those logic apps are done using connectors, and so I wanted to announce some updates that we released this week. So for Logic App and Microsoft Flow, we've updated our connectors with private transaction support. So now that we have an enterprise ledger with confidentiality, it's only appropriate that we add confidentiality support, which we'll demonstrate in just a moment. Also has worldwide availability, and that includes in the US Gov Cloud. So, we want to make sure we love all of our developers. So whether it's public Ethereum, private, but also in the US government, we want to make sure that they can have a great experience too, because there's lots of really interesting public sector scenarios that we have there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop out here. I'm going to show a logic app, and then we're going to move forward to look at another demo here. Let's go back to Edge. So I'm just going to show you what a logic app looks like. This is the logic app designer. So remember I talked about a microservice and how that works? Well, I can expose this logic app as an HTTP endpoint that you can call. And these are the connectors that we built, so I can go ahead and call a smart contract function, provide the ABI and some information there to have a dynamic experience, and then we go ahead and do a response. But suppose you said, you know what, Mark, what I'd like to be able to do is I'd also like to be able to interact with, say, Outlook, or I'd like to be able to interact with SAP, or I'd like to be able to interact with even Salesforce. So anything you really want to go do, Logic Apps represents 30, so Microsoft has been a cloud business for a number of years, but we've been in business for a lot longer than that. And so what you see in Logic Apps really reflects 30 years of enterprise integration experience, made very simple so you can sort of wire these things up together. So we found that once we had the ledger and people started developing smart contracts, they wanted to do integration, and they moved incredibly fast using this. Starbucks actually talked on stage about this last week. And the nice thing is if we don't have a connector for something that you need, you can use something called an Azure function to sort of build out some capability for you, whether it's in JavaScript, Java, C# or Python, you can be super productive. All right, so those are logic apps. The next thing I want to talk about is there's another category of developer, right? So we said there was full stack, then there's specialized, but there's one that some people call them power users, some people call them citizen developers, but these are people that have, and people in this room know, right, is that there is no shortage of ideas for blockchain. What stopped those ideas from being brought forward is friction. And so we've covered two types of developers, but this other type of developer, they're not a traditional developer. They're not going to Visual Studio Code, but they have an idea. And they want to do is maybe when this event happens in the smart contract, they want to send a text message, or they want to add something to a SharePoint list. We have this thing called Microsoft Flow. I've sort of touched on it as we go through. But Flow is something that surfaces itself instead of, say, Microsoft SharePoint. So think about Microsoft SharePoint, typical enterprise application that you use for handling workflows inside of your business. How do you handle workflows that span businesses, for example? So you can use Flow, and someone can go, and it's in SharePoint today, select Flow, create a new one, potentially from one of these templates. And you can very easily start just configuring an interaction of some kind. You can see here there's one that's got a little button press on this. You can have it so you can actually wire up this occurring as a result of a button press in something called Power Apps. And so if Flow is about the citizen developer being able to help do some interesting things around integration, Power Apps is helping that same citizen developer build out applications. So it's a web-based tool. It allows you to very easily create a mobile or a web-based application. And it's about configuration and code. And so the thing that's really cool for us, I'll tell you a story inside of Microsoft that happened. We did a hackathon in early February with some of our field. And there's a great guy, Daniel Zhu. I'm not sure if this is streaming, but big shout out to Daniel. He came in and he worked with what we call Project Westlake, which is the internal name for Azure Blockchain Service. And then he went home, and like every 3 days he started sending me videos. First he created an ERC20 token, then it was an ERC721 token, then he integrated with Dynamics. Then he had gone and created a whole marketplace, and then he added provenance and those sorts of things. And he was someone, he wasn't a blockchain person. He was someone who was passionate about blockchain but knew these tools, and he cranked out more in a week and a half than I had seen some people crank out in like 2 years in some enterprises. And so these are, you can mix and match them. We'll show you a couple apps that we built with them, but super powerful. And let me go ahead and show you just a simple example that also highlights the confidentiality in quorum. So folks were here last year. We talked about this scenario we call refrigerated transportation. It's a provenance scenario. So if you think about whether it's milk or meat or medicine or ice cream, temperature and humidity can cause things to go off and maybe be unhealthy for folks. And so milk is a common scenario here. And so here we've got something where we've got a number of different personas. This is an app that's written inside of Power Apps. And I'm going to log in and pretend that I'm Marc Mercuri. And this is going to go out and pull some data for me from the chain. A second here. The internet so one of the challenges of the internet-based demos is that when the internet is very slow, we have some challenges. Yeah, this is being non-responsive, so I'm just going to go ahead and refresh. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and it's like this. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new contract. And so this is one of the samples we have in our system. So it's Contoso Dairy is the owner. We can say that there's an observer. So a lot of times we saw smart contracts where someone was like a government regulator that's paying attention. And then we also can map a device to this. And you can see humidity and temperature. We're basically setting minimum and max ranges for these. And then down here you see these switches. So one of the things is, what do the interfaces start looking like for confidentiality? And so if you have a number of parties that you're working with, we thought it'd be easy just to go ahead and say, hey, we can say this Contoso courier can't see this, or they can see this. And so what will happen here is as we add these transactions to the system, they will be filtered, basically there'll be private transactions that will be not obvious or visible to the different participants. So here we'll make sure the Contoso courier can't see this. I'll go ahead and save that. That'll go ahead and save that off to the chain. This is an app that was very easy for us to build inside of Power Apps. And our networking connection is very slow. Okay, so here we go. Now it's come back. Now you can see here that there's a couple of options that are available to me. So it's now been created. I can go ahead and transfer that. Now with Power Apps, I can also use the sensors on the phone. So I could scan a QR code if I had it here. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to hand this off to Contoso Courier. I'm going to hit transfer. And now imagine this scenario. I've got a phone, and I'm walking around, and I'm going to go deliver this package to this next party. Because you have 4 or 5 people that are delivering the package on its way to its destination. The person can have a badge. That badge can have a QR code, not dissimilar to what we have here. I go to deliver that. I can scan it from him, and then I can go ahead and move it onto the chain for me. And then we can also take data from IoT. This is, I can set it manually if I wanted to send that out of compliance. So I can say that the range is 2 to 5. I'll make it like 99. That'll send that to the chain. And the smart contract behind the scenes is going to go ahead and recognize that that's out of compliance. And so we built an app. We worked with confidentiality. And then we can also integrate with IoT. And so you can see, oh, my session expired. refresh the site here. So this is something called IoT Central. And so this is, we have IoT Hub, which is sort of high industrial grade IoT. And we also have IoT Central. And that allows us to send simulated data across. So we could wire this up to the contract. For the interest of time, we'll do that. I can show people offline. But I can go ahead and set the transportation address, which is the smart contract. And it will go ahead and send this information to it. So the device actually becomes a party on the smart contract and is sending data across to it. So we've got 13 minutes left, and we've got something pretty cool to show you. So we're going to sort of advance here so you can see the final demo of the SATs. So we talked about building and extending an application. We've talked about a bunch of tools that are here. We have their Azure Blockchain Workbench, which allows you to define a contract, configure it, and very rapidly build an application. We also have the Azure Blockchain Dev Kit, which consists of the Logic App connectors, a set of samples that are there, as well as of course, our VS Code tool. The other thing we wanted to announce is that we also have available Azure Blockchain Workbench. People said, hey, we love it, but we don't like having to manage the VMs. That's now available as standard out of the box. It's the default. And then we talked about DevOps and what you need to think about in terms of building solutions in the world of consortiums. We have 2 documents that are available today on our website. One is for key considerations, so things you just need to think about as you move to the consortium world. And then we have an implementation guide for Ethereum blockchains. So definitely check those out. This is something that Tim and our teams worked together on. We're really proud of it. I think it solved some problems. Customers had a good experience. And then before we get to the demo, I did want to give Tim a couple minutes to talk about Truffle Teams, something new that's coming from Truffle.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So one thing we realized pretty recently with our tooling is that put together, it works really well for a single developer or a small group of developers to build a blockchain application. But generally, it gets you to the point where you deploy, and then they end up asking themselves, what happens next? Once you deploy a blockchain application to your network of choice, what do you do? And we realized that there was a gap in the development lifecycle or the application lifecycle of the blockchain applications that people were building. And so what we did is we wanted to fill that gap, and that's what we're building with Truffle Teams. So imagine, say, you have a contract, and in this case I'm just going to use this example in the public network because this has happened quite a bit. You have a contract on the public network and value is flowing out of it. Well, wouldn't it be great if you got a notification that maybe value is flowing out of your contract when you didn't expect it? So let's say you get this notification, and then maybe it comes to your phone or an email, and you say, like, oh no, this is not supposed to be happening. Well, what do you do next? You could frantically get on the command line and try to write this, the correct transaction to stop your contract if it's if it's a possible contract, say from Open Zeppelin, or you could log into Truffle Teams that gave you this notification, go to the management interface here and just hit the pause button, and of course we'll integrate with MetaMask and everything else, and you'll be able to stop that transaction immediately. That's one of the cases that we like to talk about. If you look at this picture on the left here, there's a dashboard of all the transactions that are happening, error rates. Imagine being able to go into this system, like a failed transaction happened. If you're on a Web 2.0 system and you get a notification of a failed, of an error, you might know where that error exists in the code, but you don't know how to reproduce it. Because all the states on the chain, we can give you with one button press, we can give you an interface where you can debug that transaction. I'm running low on time here, but another thing that we want to do is give you a deployment workflow so you're not just going to work on one chain, you're not just going to work locally, you're definitely going to work on your consortium chain. And we wanted to give you a workflow to deploy between local, staging, production, and be able to graduate or promote the versions that are supposed to work correctly. So some of the things we have in the pipeline, we want to give you some analytics and monitoring of your blockchain application. We're going to integrate with Azure pipelines so you can have a more advanced CI workflow with your blockchain application. Again, development and staging blockchains, we want to make those with a single click. The continuous delivery workflow I just mentioned, those interfaces, we wanted to make it really easy for you to interact with your contracts. Full state transaction debugging, again, one click and you can see what happened on a failed transaction, a failed interaction a user had with your application. And then we're going to integrate with multiple enterprise ledgers. So there's some news there, stay tuned. And of course, this is built on Azure. Thanks, Mark.
Excellent, thanks, Tim. So we talked about a lot of things we learned from customers. One of the things they came back to us with is, okay, so you've given us a world-class ledger, we've got confidentiality, we've got, and with that confidentiality quorum, we got higher throughput. We've got great tools now. And then there were some scenarios like, quorum is fast, but there's certain scenarios where we want to go just a little bit faster. These are some things we could do together. And so I'm going to talk to you about something called the Confidential Consortium Framework very briefly. And then I want to show you something that Microsoft and the Quorum team have done together that we think is pretty impressive, and we would love to get your feedback on. So when we talk about confidential computing, this notion of trusted execution environments, or TEEs. So basically protect workloads during computation. There's code and data that are isolated in encrypted enclaves, so preventing snooping and tampering, even by the OS or trusted administrators. And we built this framework. It used to be called COCO. We now refer to it as the Confidential Consortium Framework, CCF. And it really addresses three key pain points we had from customers. One is they want throughput approaching database speeds. They want rich, flexible confidentiality models, and they want decentralized governance. This actually was released last week as open source. And a number of folks that we worked with at major ISVs said, hey, we'd like you to release that. Microsoft, you typically release it under the MIT licenses. For us, it'd be important if you released it under Apache. And so we went ahead and did that. It's hosted on GitHub. We're taking contributions. We're really, really excited about it. But let's talk about how you use it. Let's make it real. Because we tell people, it's like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting, but what does it actually mean for me? And so you may have heard last week, we have an agreement with JP Morgan. And one of the scenarios that they have is around JPM Coin. So it enables 24/7, 365 global value settlement. It's a digital coin designed to facilitate instantaneous payments, and it's issued on Quorum. And so Quorum is great for high-value assets at lower volumes, and it can handle 800 transactions a second. But if they want significantly more throughput, we thought this might be an opportunity to do what they say, like chocolate and peanut butter better together, and sort of work with the two teams. And so together, the thought is that you could have confidentiality preserved by the trusted execution environment and get that high throughput to support requirements via simplified consensus. So let me show you what that actually translates to. So over here, we're going to show you another Power App. And I'm going to go ahead and come down. Let's refresh just to make sure we haven't lost our connection. Okay. And so I'm going to click here. It's going to start refreshing, which means this logic app, this Power App is connecting to a flow behind the scenes and is monitoring what's happening. And you can see right now there's nothing really going on. Well, go over here to Putty. Go to JPM Coin. I'm going to go ahead and load that up. Go ahead and open it. Okay. Okay, and so what am I going to do here? Go ahead and run the script. So what's happening right now, we'll go full screen so you can see this for a minute. We can't actually catch up fast enough. We're just throwing transactions at it, thousands of transactions a second at CCF, and it's not skipping a beat. Behind the scenes, what's happening is we are setting up randomly between these four parties. So JPM has issued in this scenario. And for folks who aren't sort of traditional Microsoft folks, Contoso, Woodgrove, Duwamish, and Northwind are like our greatest hits of fake companies. And so they have JPM coins and now being transitioned randomly, these transactions just shifting coins amongst each other. But in terms of significant throughput, you're now getting much, much faster than what you get with chains traditionally. Now, this was something that, Sam, we did several weeks. I mean, this is not, so this is going much, much faster, and we think we can go faster still. So one thing I want to show you just as we sort of close out the session and go to questions. One second here. Oh, it's an issue with the putty. Give me one quick second. Needs a key, doesn't it? So we'll get our key. Okay. Okay. And so small bank is a demo that's done sort of as a benchmark for looking at transactions in a bank. And so it's going to run for a second or two. Oh, hang on 1 second. That's not right. So now we're running the small bank demonstration. And in just a second, we'll have just run 60,000 transactions per second. So we're done. Think about what you get in the public chain today. Think about how the quorum team has advanced what you get within quorum. And then for those scenarios where you want to get a little bit more, and you need some of the privacy that's right for confidentiality, you can opt in to use CCF. And what I love about the model that Sam and the team and with the coordination is you have the option of doing all three. So if you think about trusted execution environments, there's some costs that are associated with that. And if that makes sense for your workload, you can absolutely use it. If you want to use private on-chain, you could use it. If you want to use public, you use it as well. So just to recap, we released a lot this week. We listened to what you told us over the last year, and we brought a lot of new capabilities to market. And as we wrap, I would just like to go ahead and say thank you to a number of customers and partners. Because the reality is that the way that you build tools that help developers go fast is by listening. And so Sam and team have done it in the Ledger. We've done it together in dev tools. And we work with enterprise customers. And so you look at the names in here, this is not like first bank of nowhere. Like when you hear some people talk about stuff they're doing, it's with someone who's not building something for real, and it doesn't necessarily reflect a real use case. These are people doing real world things, solving hard problems, and they're using blockchain. It's coming to the enterprise. We hope you like what we shipped. We'd love to hear what we don't have and what you'd like us to see us do. And definitely stop by and talk to us on stage. And we've got plenty of folks from my team and our dev organization out here in the audience today. And if you'd like to get started, we've got some links here. And I think we've got a very brief opportunity for questions. And we could also do questions off to the side when we're done. But with that, thank you. And also thank you to Sam and to Tim, both for being here today and their tremendous partnership as we sort of tackle the enterprise together. Thank you.